I've been looking for some time for a stamp which has the picture of the old Sistine Chapel, but I guess it's full of so many things that nobody has issued a stamp which covers the old Sistine Chapel. So I have to start with a picture. I apologize with that, but this gives an idea of the size of the Sistine Chapel and the many things which are in it. Tonight we are focusing mostly on the Michelangelo area, Michelangelo works, which are basically this section here and this section here. I will talk briefly about the other works which are on the two sides of the chapel, but there is already so much to cover with the Michelangelo works that I prefer to stay with that specifically. Now, I don't know how many of you have been in Rome or know Rome, but anyway, I thought that I should start with a map of Rome just to give you an idea. This is the city. This is basically the center of the city, and the Vatican is on this side. And the Sistine Chapel is somewhere here. We'll see another map later on, and it's inside the Vatican, the state of the Vatican. Why I wanted to present something about Rome and the Sistine Chapel? Well, you know, I'm Italian. I have lived in Rome for about 3 years. It's a city which has left a very deep mark in my memories. I've been a traveler for all my life. I don't know if you are aware, but I've been relocating 15 times during my life. I've worked in 9 countries, including the other ones where I've done some part-time work, etc. There are 16 countries. So I have a lot of cities or places to which I'm very attached to. But Rome is a special place in my memories, because the Rome, I'm talking about 50 years ago, the Rome of 50 years ago was quite different from the Rome of today. To give you an idea, during the winter, there weren't too many tourists around. You could go and just step into a museum or art gallery or whatever. No queue, nothing. You would go and ask for a ticket, and if you were a student or enrolled in the military, that I was either one or the other during the time, most of the places you would enter for free. So it was really great if you just had half an hour or 1 hour of free time. That's what I did. I would just go somewhere, just enter into one of the historical places and visit them for half an hour or 1 hour with no constriction. The Vatican and the Sistine Chapel was a bit different, and you will understand why when I go to the next slide. This is a stamp of the Vatican which shows the map of the old Vatican. Probably many of you are not aware of it, but a large part of the Vatican is a big garden. So in terms of concentration of, or the division of building with and cultivated area or area with trees and plants, basically it's half and half. All this section here, and let me just recap. This is St. Peter, and that's where most of the tourists enter. There is a very long road which arrives here to the square, and then people enter into St. Peter. And just in this section here, that's where the Sistine Chapel is. But to visit the Sistine Chapel, you have to enter from here. And all this section here is part of the Vatican museums. So to arrive to the Sistine Chapel, you have to go all through these buildings here, where there are a lot of beautiful artworks to see. And then in the end, you arrive to the Sistine Chapel. So this was one of the places which was a little bit more difficult for me to visit, because you needed to plan quite a few hours. You could not just go for half an hour, just step in and see the Sistine Chapel. But the beauty at that time was that as there weren't too many tourists, you could just enter into the Sistine Chapel and stay there, even lie on the floor and look at the ceiling without anybody bothering you, or the pressure of getting in and out because other tourists are coming through and you cannot stay there for too long, which unfortunately is the case now. So I am particularly attached to the Sistine Chapel because of that, because of the memories that I have of when you could visit it in a more intense way, if you want, or a more complete way. Let's try to do this visit with you and try to share with you certain things that are basically described in stamps of the Vatican. But I've used also stamps of Italy and other countries because, and you will see, because there is something very specific in there that I wanted to share with you. So first of all, the Sistine Chapel was built and was completed or painted under quite a few popes. And the first one is Sixtus IV, Sisto in Italian. That's where the Sistine Chapel name comes from. The name of the chapel is dedicated to this pope. There was a chapel before in the same place of the Sistine Chapel, but the chapel was not in good condition, dated back to the 1200. So the Pope decided to throw that chapel down and rebuild a new one, and that was the Sistine Chapel. But they used the foundings of the old chapel, and they left some of even part of the bottom walls from the old chapel, which was a problem because evidently in the 1200 they were not building the buildings in the same way that they were used to do 300 or 400 years later. And the structure of the Sistine Chapel revealed not to be that strong because of that. And instead of being a problem, that was instead a very good thing. And you will see that when we go through the rest of the presentation. Julius II was the Pope who decided to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel and to give the job to Michelangelo. Why? Because the Sistine Chapel started to move, or at least part of the building, and the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel cracked in a few places. There was a painting already, because the original painting of the Sistine Chapel was a starry night, was a sky with stars, painted by a very good painter, by the way. But unfortunately, with all those cracks, the painting looked very bad. And so the Pope decided that they had to fix the ceiling, but then why not try to paint something nicer on the ceiling. And so Julius was the one who called Michelangelo from Florence and asked him to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Nobody thought about the altar area, where there were some paintings already on the bottom end of it, but nothing else. Then Pope Clement VII, and we're talking here Julius II between 1503 and 1513, Clement was about 20 years later, he came up with the idea of painting the area behind the altar. And once again, he called Michelangelo in. And that's where then Michelangelo started painting that part of the wall. But then Clement VII died soon afterwards, and Paul III was the one that basically financed the rest of the job. So the Sistine Chapel is a religious place, a sort of a big chapel, because actually you see the size is fairly quite big. The chapel is quite big, and has the capacity to host a fairly high number of people in it. So in the 1800s, they decided to do in it the election of the Pope. At the beginning, actually, all the cardinals would sit in there, and they would spend there day and night. But now the arrangements are different. They spend the whole day in there, but then they sleep at night somewhere else. And during the period of the Vatican, of the state of the Vatican, from 1929 to today, there have been 7 different stamp issues which have celebrated the election of the new Pope. The issues always bear the name sede vacante, which means vacant seat, the time between the death of the departure of the Pope, of the old Pope, and the election of the new one. Normally what happens with the election of the Pope is that if the Pope is elected, some white smoke is sent through the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and that indicates that the new Pope has been elected. We will see about all the issues concerning smoke, pollution, etc., later on when we talk about the last restoration of the Sistine Chapel. The other function that the Sistine Chapel has, beside, of course, quite a few religious ceremonies which take place in there, it's a baptism. On the 10th of January this year, the Pope should have baptized quite a few newborn babies in the Sistine Chapel. Because of the COVID, that did not happen, but it's happened all the years before, and quite surely in 22, this tradition will continue. So don't be surprised to hear that young couples in Rome are very busy in the months of January and February, trying to initiate a new life or to conceive a new life, because their ambition is to have a baby around at the end of the year, so that the baby is invited to be baptized by the Pope in January in the Sistine Chapel. Now, the Sistine Chapel, when it was started, the southern and northern walls were painted first. And those walls, they were painted by different painters. They were all coming from Florence. They were sent by the Medici family to Rome as a sign of friendship with the Pope. You know that at that time there were always differences, political differences and wars between different parts of Italy, and that was an attempt by the Medicis to establish a better relationship with the Roman states, which were their neighbor geographically. And so these painters, they came to Rome, and they painted the southern and northern walls. I want to mention this, even if this is not Michelangelo work, because it's the beginning of the concept of biblical history that the painters wanted to paint on the walls of the Sistine Chapel, that then Michelangelo will continue. And because these are the only stamps where we have the full painting in a stamp. All the other stamps that you will see, they always detail a portion of the painting, because the paintings are so big that it is very difficult or it doesn't really work well to have the whole painting in one stamp. These stamps here, they present the work of 4 artists: Ghirlandaio, Botticelli, Perugino, and Rosselli. These are 4 different artists who got together and they agreed to paint in the same dimension, different motifs, different part of the Old Testament, but to paint it in a synchronized way. So this is very interesting, because to have 4 artists who decide to paint as a team, considering that they were definitely in competition between each other, definitely it's something very unique. And the Perugino was the coordinator of this painting, of all the approach to take in painting the all southern northern walls. And Ghirlandaio was a painter that luckily went back to Florence soon after he finished his work, because Ghirlandaio has been basically the painter with whom Michelangelo discovered paintings. Without Ghirlandaio, probably Michelangelo would not have been able to achieve what he has achieved. So, who is Michelangelo? Michelangelo is a man who lived over 80 years. So was particularly for his time, had a very long life. But he was raised in difficult times, because the father was a banker. They had a small bank. The family owned a small bank, but the bank went bankrupt. So the father got a government job. He went in a small town, and he ran the administration in the small town. But then the mother got very sick. And so the father went back to Florence, but left Michelangelo as a baby with the nanny and with the husband of the nanny. And guess what? The husband of the nanny was working in a marble quarry. So what Michelangelo saw in the first part of his life was only fields, farmers, and people cutting the marble. And that's basically what raised the interest of Michelangelo in becoming a sculptor. An interesting feature of this is a stamp, an Italian stamp, which shows a portrait of Michelangelo. Michelangelo was very accurate in the presentation of in the painting faces, and so definitely this is a very, very close presentation of Michelangelo face with no embellishment, because Michelangelo didn't like to embellish things that much, including his big nose, which was the result of a fight that he had when he was 17 with another painter, where they ended up fighting so badly that the other painter broke Michelangelo's nose. And at that time, unfortunately, they weren't the same possibilities there are today. So Michelangelo remained for all his life with a bit of a deformed nose. These two stamps that we see on the right, we'll talk about this later on. They present the creation of Adam and the creation of Eve. And we'll see them later on in the presentation of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. So Michelangelo, as he was raised in a quarry, and the only thing he saw around himself was lots of marble, he grew up with the desire of being a sculptor. And for most of his life, he considered himself a sculptor, not a painter. Although in early part of his life, when he was 13, so imagine Michelangelo lived until he was 7 or 8 in near a quarry with no education, nobody teaching him anything except the nanny and the husband. Then he went back to Florence. He started getting some basic education, but at the age of 13, he was already doing apprenticeship with Ghirlandaio, who was a painter. And that's where he started learning how to paint. And he did it so well and so fast that by the time that he was 14, Michelangelo's father negotiated with Ghirlandaio that Ghirlandaio would pay him a salary. This was very unusual for the time because normally the apprentices were not getting any pay at all. They were having just the joy of learning the craft, the learning how to do things. So Michelangelo started learning about painting with Ghirlandaio, but his passion was in building statues, in being a sculptor. And the result was that in the early 20s, he managed already to make some of his better known masterpieces. You see here on the left and on the right, two particulars of the Pietà, which is in St. Peter. It's a statue of Our Lady holding Jesus, and the David, which is in Florence. These are the two incredible works of art, which were made by Michelangelo when he was just a little bit over 20 years old. So definitely started very, very young. And he was famous already by the time that he was 24, 25 because of this. But Michelangelo liked much more another statue, which is the Moses. And this statue has a big story behind it. Besides the disappointment that I have because there are no Vatican stamps of the Moses, or even an Italian stamps, but the Moses was the statue that Michelangelo liked better, to the point that when he finished it, he was so excited that he started banging on the statue and saying to the statue, "Perché non parli? Why don't you talk to me?" Because he thought that it was so live, so full of expression that the statue had to talk to him. So that shows how Michelangelo really loved the statues and thought that this was his best masterpiece. The statue was part of a big work that Julius II gave to him as a project for his tomb. But what happened was that because of the death of the Pope before he finished the work, then different popes had different ideas about financing it. And this was a job which was not completed the way that the Pope originally wanted it. And instead of ending up in the Vatican, ended up in a smaller form in a church, San Pietro in Vincoli, which is near the Colosseum. But still is a beautiful, so this is the tomb of the Pope, and the Moses is sitting right in the center. So Michelangelo has done a few paintings, but by age 30 has painted very little, and most of his big works have been all sculptures. But then here comes the problem with the Sistine Chapel. This is a print of the way that the Sistine Chapel looked before Michelangelo work. So what you see is that here there is a sky full of stars, and that covers the whole area of the ceiling. And then here on this side, there are two big windows, and there are some little frescoes here, and then there are two big frescoes here at the bottom. Remember this, because the Sistine Chapel that you see today is totally different. The sky doesn't exist anymore. That's the ceiling that was painted by Michelangelo in the first assignment he got from the Pope. And then these windows don't exist anymore. They were closed. These paintings at the bottom, unfortunately, they were, by decision of the Pope, they were taken away to make room in all this area to the universal judgment by Michelangelo, which was the second job that Michelangelo was asked to make when he was older. So this area here around here cracked. There were big cracks to a point that they had to add the bricks, and they had to redo quite a bit of the area of the ceiling. And the painting of the sky and of the stars was totally ruined. And so the Pope decided, let's then talk about putting on the ceiling the painting of 12 apostles. That was the original idea of the Pope. The legend says that Bramante, who was the architect of the St. Peter Church, which was built at the same time, and apparently the works on St. Peter Church also may have caused some problems to the structure of the Sistine Chapel, where all these cracks came out initially. Bramante did not like Michelangelo too much, and knew that Michelangelo was not very keen to paint, but preferred to do sculptures. And Bramante was not happy that Michelangelo did a big job of the tomb of the Pope, where Michelangelo, you saw the statue of Moses before. So Bramante thought that by suggesting to the Pope of giving a painting job to Michelangelo in a very difficult place, because the ceiling was very difficult to paint, would be probably something that would tarnish the image of Michelangelo as an incredible artist. Michelangelo, although was not very happy about painting, he started talking to the Pope, and he came up with the idea that 12 apostles was too much of a small job for him, and that he had to work on something bigger than that. So he came up with a plan where basically from 12 apostles, we arrived to a painting which is spanning on 500 square meters, which took 4 years of intensive job to do, and which has about 300 people or images in it. From 12 to 300 is a big jump. The work on the Sistine Chapel was not easy at all, at the beginning was there were so many problems that would have discouraged almost everybody. First thing, the initial plaster was not good enough. When Michelangelo started testing the painting, there was mold everywhere. There were infiltration of water. And so Michelangelo had to develop with one of his assistants some specific changes to the plaster composition to make sure that it would be resistant to the mold and would not cause some damage to the painting later on. Then there was the issue of how to be able to paint a ceiling that was fairly high. And of course, the ceiling was not flat. So Bramante came up with the suggestion of a scaffolding and presented that to the Pope. But of course, Michelangelo didn't like it. So Michelangelo was not impressed because the scaffolding had to be supported by some chains attached to the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and that would make his work more difficult, and that would leave some blank area in between. So he designed his own scaffolding, which was going on different heights, because of course, as the ceiling of the chapel was not flat, he had to be able to be close to the ceiling all the time. And that meant that the scaffolding had to be higher or lower, depending on where he was painting. The other thing is that he had to be able to paint in a comfortable way, because first of all, the story that he was painting lying down is not true. He was standing up, but because the ceiling was not flat, evidently certain times the position that he had to take to paint was not very comfortable. And Michelangelo worked for many hours per day, and some paintings he managed to do them in one day or in 4 or 5 days. One of those that seem to have been relatively fast has been the central one, which is the creation of Adam. So just to give you an idea, these are all stories of the genesis, of the beginning of the creation of the world. Then all around here, there are images of the ancestor of Jesus, or anyway, the predecessor of Jesus, and of the people, religious figures and pagan figures that had, in a way or another, forecasted the creation, the coming of Jesus. And that's where, by adding all these people, evidently, Michelangelo arrived at 300 figures while he developed the drawings of the preparation, because Michelangelo had to make a drawing of the images before he painted them on the wall to understand exactly the dimension, etc., etc. Those ones, they've all been destroyed. They're not. There is nothing left of it. But definitely, they were a challenging work as much as the painting itself, because Michelangelo had to figure out exactly the right proportion, right dimension of every single part of the painting to make it fit properly in this 500 square area that he was attacking with his work. So as I said, the stamps of the Vatican in general, they only reproduce some details of the painting themselves, because it is difficult to present in a stamp the whole painting. But for example, in this issue of the Vatican, what they decided to do, they create a combination of two stamps to present two parts of the central work of the ceiling of the chapel by Michelangelo. This is the creation of Adam, which is very interesting because this shows a few things that create a lot of scandal at the time. One, we're talking about a religious place, and a lot of people are totally nude, totally naked. And that was something that caused a lot of reactions, not by the Pope himself, but by some cardinals. And we will talk about this later on. The other thing is that, for example, in the creation of Adam, this is God and this is Adam. And the interpretation of Michelangelo was that God made Adam as an image of himself. So Michelangelo took that to the letter, and there is a lot of similarity between God and Michelangelo and Adam, and they are of the same dimension. And there is this finger touching Adam, and Adam basically opening his eyes for the first time and seeing God, and having in the painting almost the same importance, if you want, or the same dimension of God himself. This is another particular where we talk about the original sin. And once again, as you see, there is plenty of naked figures. This part of the ceiling, for some reason, was not the object of too much criticism, but more the universal judgment, because the ceiling was a bit farther away, and probably the cardinals of some of the more conservative people found that part of nakedness less offensive. But instead, the judgment, which was coming all the way down to the floor of the Sistine Chapel, was the work which was more criticized by some people, and we'll see with which consequences later on. So this is another set of the Vatican stamps. Once again, this reproduces some particular of the Sistine Chapel, and particular in this case, these are the Sibyls, which we will see later on more in detail, are two ladies that they would forecast the future in the old Roman Greek tradition, and apparently, in a way or another, they forecasted the coming of Jesus. In other cases, like in these paintings here, these are some prophets directly from the Bible. Michelangelo was inspired by the Bible stories for that. The second work that Michelangelo did in the Sistine Chapel was the Universal Judgment. That took place about 20 years later. So when Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel, he was in the 30s. When he painted the Universal Judgment, he was in the 50s. The Universal Judgment was a relatively easier job to be done because it was on a vertical surface. But unfortunately, as I mentioned before, first Michelangelo found out that those windows were too disruptive, so he closed them completely. And on instruction of the Pope, he took away two very nice frescoes, which were pre-existent in that part of the of the chapel. Once again, this is just the central figure of the Universal Judgment. That's Jesus and Our Lady, and this was one of the major area of scandal at the time, because the expectation was that Jesus and Our Lady had to be more dressed than what Michelangelo had planned. And the result was that after the death of Michelangelo, the cardinals managed to convince the Pope to appoint a painter whose surname became Mr. Trousers, because his task was to paint sort of trousers or cover-ups of some of the body parts of the personalities of the people who were in the Last Judgment. This is another issue of the Vatican, and this shows a little bit a bigger part of the Universal Judgment, always only the top part, but this is obtained by combining different stamps in one block and having the possibility then to expand a little bit the vision of the painting. The concept of the painting was very simple. Basically, at the Last Judgment, that's the moment where the good people are then raised to a position next to Jesus, while the bad ones, which don't appear here, but they're further down in the painting, are then sent to hell. The restoration. The paintings of Michelangelo during the time, they changed their color, they changed for different reasons. One, as I said, the decision to add some cover-ups to some of the body parts of people in the paintings in the Universal Judgment. Those things were added later on, but also the dust, the smoke, particularly the candle smoke, they caused the creation of layers on top of the original Michelangelo paintings. Definitely there were issues with some water humidity and some mold in some areas. So in the end, in the 70s, 1970, around 1970, the people in charge of the Sistine Chapel, they start looking for the possibility of doing an extensive restoration of the Sistine Chapel. In the end, they found a sponsor in a Japanese TV company, and they gave a very large donation to obtain the rights to film, to be the only ones to film the old restoration of the Sistine Chapel, and the work started. The restoration was definitely obtained incredible results, stopped a lot of the damage that with time had been created on the paintings, but also was criticized quite a bit by some art experts. I did not know too much about the restoration of the Sistine Chapel when it started, because I was involved with my job and I was very far away from the art world. But I ended up working in the States in late 80s, and I ended up having a PA in my office that had a particular connection with Dr. James Beck. Her name was Nora Beck, was the daughter of Dr. James Beck. And besides being a very good basketball player, because she ended up in the Hall of Fame of the Columbia University, and being a good musicologist, because now she teaches at Lewis and Clark University in Portland. She was also the daughter of James Beck, who was a professor of art at Columbia University, and who was very involved in discussions about the restoration of the Sistine Chapel. So she introduced me to the work of the father, and that was very interesting because the complexity of the restoration work cannot be understood if one doesn't really read these presentations made by these experts and goes into depth into understanding what it entails. Basically, the concerns of James Beck, and he was so vocal about it that he started Art Watch International, which is an organization which still exists, which goes around checking on the restoration work of certain old artworks, and tries to make sure that the restoration is not done only by looking at the technical side of it, but also looking at this history of the painting themselves or the artworks themselves, to try to understand how to restore it without somehow destroying some of the original background. The concern that James Beck had is that the restoration was done in a way that all the layers of material which was had accumulated on top of the Michelangelo painting was removed. And in removing that, they also removed the part of the additional paintings, corrections, if you want, that were made later on under instruction of the more conservative cardinals, but probably also removed some layers that Michelangelo himself had put on top of the painting. Namely, his theory is that Michelangelo did not expect to have such bright colors as the ones that you see here on the right, wanted to soften the colors a little bit, and at the same time also he wanted to protect the painting from any deterioration or any damage, and so he put some layers of additional coating on top of the painting itself. Now all this has been removed, and with the restoration, which is finished in the 90s, basically the painting is become, as you can see, extremely bright. The colors have changed dramatically. The details of some of the parts of the painting now are much more clearer, but probably, at least this was his theory, the painting is even brighter than what Michelangelo painted originally. The concerns that he had about the damages to the painting with time probably today are not so important, because after the renovation, the Sistine Chapel has been basically sealed. The windows are not open anymore. The number of people that enter into the Sistine Chapel is controlled, and there is a system of air ventilation and air conditioning that is adapted continuously to the number of people being in the chapel at any time, to avoid any type of condensation or any type of build-up of any type of material or dust or whatever on the painting during the day. So there is a stamp set that reproduces particular of the Michelangelo paintings of the Sistine Chapel, which was issued by Italy in 1961. Originally, there were 19 stamps in the set, 18 particular of the Sistine Chapel, and one, the 200 lire one, a portrait of Michelangelo, a self-portrait of Michelangelo. The idea was that then later on some other stamps would be added to the set, but this unfortunately never happened. So this is the full set. The decision taken at that time was to focus on one color. So ignore the original colors of Michelangelo painting, but focus on the faces and adopt one color. I was a bit skeptic at the time about the capability of really reproducing the work of Michelangelo, but I must say that I've grown attached to this set of stamps, because in reality, the one color gives even more, a lot of importance, and underlines even more the work that Michelangelo has done in detailing the faces of the different personalities of different people, which are in the painting of the Sistine Chapel. There are some stamps that for some reason I'm very attached to, like this one here, which I think has got really a lot of character. We will see some other ones later on. This is a set of stamps which is very common, although it has had also some variety of watermarks. In particular, this stamp here with a different watermark, it's very rare. Unfortunately, I don't have any. So here it is, the 30 lira one. And this is a particular of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And the Sibylla Eritrea. This is the full painting on the right. So it's just the particular of the face of the Sibylla. The Sibylla Eritrea has nothing to do with the country of Eritrea, but was a name of a location in Greece where there was a Sibylla, there was a lady that was forecasting the future. And you know, the old tradition was that these ladies, they would live forever. In reality, what happened was that they were passing the tradition from mother to daughter, or from one lady to another. So there was always a Sibylla Eritrea in that place, like in other locations in the old Roman and Greek times. And they were all forecasting the future. And one of the Sibylla Eritrea forecasted at a certain point the coming of a particular messenger of God that is then interpreted by religious people as being an indication that she was forecasting the coming of Jesus. This is the 20 lira stamp. Here is the Sibylla Libica. That's also a Sibyl who lived in Libya, this one. And you see the colors, probably, definitely this portion, this painting is one of the nicest one, but the fact that it's all green here definitely underlines even more the particulars of this face, which is not a beautiful face, but it is very detailed and is very realistic. Michelangelo spent a lot of time in cemeteries, in priories, where he could look at bodies of people and studied the details of the body to the extreme. And so what Michelangelo paints is always a body as it is. Doesn't try to make it look nicer, but as close as possible as would be to a picture nowadays. So this always from the ceiling is a particular of the prophet Daniel. This is a 40 lira stamps, always from the same set of 1961. One of the criticism of the restoration is that some of the shades of the eyes of some figures in the painting somehow they went lost because there was some additional layer that Michelangelo had created to make the eyes look a little bit brighter or more visible. But this is something that, as nobody has any copy of or any picture of what the painting was originally, it's difficult to prove. This is another Sibyl, the Sibylla Delphica. This is always from Greece, from Delphi. This one is probably the one where the proportion of the eyes, it's a bit particular. It's a bit I'm not sure this is one of the nicest stamps, one of the nicest painting of the faces of Michelangelo. Instead, the 100 lira reproduces the prophet Ezekiel, and somehow the face in the painting, the face doesn't attract the attention of people as much, but this I think is one of the best particular. I like it a lot. I think that definitely this face has everything. So Michelangelo painted the Last Judgment, and then he started getting into his 60s and paint many hours on scaffolding. Was not becoming that easy for him. Probably his control of his hands also was not as good as it was before. So Michelangelo started pulling away from painting and making statues. Although he finished, he started the statue, which is almost finished, 6 days before dying, when he was in his 80s. So he didn't stop completely, but he converted to a different type of job, and he became an architect. The Pope asked him to continue the work that Bramante had done in developing the St. Peter Basilica. And he basically, these are two stamps showing the Basilica as it is today. At the time of Michelangelo, this portion here was still to be built. And basically he was the one who designed and started the construction of the cupola, which continued after his death. The picture here shows all the columns which are all around the front of St. Peter. This was not the opera of Michelangelo. Michelangelo never added the columns to the church. So basically there were only some columns on the two sides, and that was it. This was added later on, actually a couple of 100 years later. With the work that he did on the cupola, basically the body of the St. Peter Cathedral was completed, thanks to the final efforts of the final work of Michelangelo. Now, I finished the presentation about Michelangelo's work on the Sistine Chapel, but I wanted to add a particular stamp that I have, or it's a block that I have in my collection, because it is something that I'm very attached to, and has got a little bit of history about it. So the columns around St. Peter were not designed by Michelangelo, were then designed by Bernini, and in 2012 the Vatican decided to restore all the columns of St. Peter, and they came up with a brilliant idea. They decided that they would issue a set of stamps in a particular design, reproducing the columns, and they would ask for donations for the restoration of the columns, in addition to the price of 20 euros, which is about $30, for the stamps themselves. I had stopped subscribing to the stamps, the new issues of the Vatican by that time, and I was not aware that you could book one set, make a donation, and obtain that your name would be printed in the souvenir sheet. But a friend of mine knew it, and this is one of the best presents I could ever get. One day I received in the mail this copy here, which is a unique printing with my name on it. You will not find it in Scott, but it is on the Italian catalogs. And of course, it's got no value because nobody, at least for now, has decided to put their own one with their own name for sale anywhere. So there are a few thousand around, but still each of them has got a different name of a different donor. In my case, it's not the name of the donor, but is the name of that the donor has asked to print on the submission. So this is something very unique that I thought I would like to share with you at the end of my presentation. So we have left the Sistine Chapel. This is another stamp which reproduces the creation of the sun and of the planets. In 2015, for the Year of the Light, the Vatican issued this set of stamps. I had so many stamps to pick that I could only choose a few, because definitely there are a lot of stamps of the Sistine Chapel issued by the Vatican, but also by other countries during the years. The hope is that one day we may go back to the Sistine Chapel and you may be able to see it for real, and that at least it triggered your curiosity a little bit and has given you a little bit of insight in a place that for the moment is closed to our travel plans or travel possibilities. So hope to see you in Rome sometime. And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you.